I hope this morning that you are able to sing that with confidence. Jesus Christ, my living hope. As believers, as Christians, He is our hope, our joy, and our reward. It is good to be back among you. For some of you, it may be, well, we kind of enjoyed that 6 weeks he was gone. For some of you, you're glad to see me, and I'm glad to see you as well. So it's good to be back in and among you. I want to share a little bit about some of the things that God kind of spoke to me about during that 6 week sabbatical that I was gone, and I've been back a couple weeks now, but just want to share a little bit about what kind of God was speaking to me about, and I trust that maybe God was speaking to you through this as well this morning. I want to start out this morning with a question. Have you ever faced something in your life where you had to make the choice of either to quit or to press on? Maybe it's an obstacle, something in your life, and it's just like, all right, I can either keep doing this or I can stop. One of these, the examples in my own life, and this is going to be like a very practical one, is we were in Branson, Missouri last summer, and there's this new ropes course there. And in that ropes course, there's also a climbing wall. Now, I saw Bryce, I think Bryce it was, that really liked the climbing wall. And I'd never done it before. And, of course, my wife got harnessed in and just raced right to the top. I said, okay, I've never done this before. Let's try. So I think we have a picture of me. There's actually a video as well, but I didn't show that one. So this is me at the bottom of this climbing wall. And you walk in very confident, like, I got this. I'm harnessed in, I'm going to go. Next picture. Here I am, and I am rocking this thing out. I'm climbing up quickly and making good time. Next slide. And it's right here. And you kind of see it. I kind of have to kind of move off to the right. And it's right here. I have to make a choice. Do I keep going, or do I just like, nah, yeah, I'm good? I can keep going. I trust this harness. But here's the thing. I'm not afraid of heights, but I really like the ground. Anybody who really likes the ground this morning? And it's like, this harness has me, but weirder things have happened. Weirder things have broken. I'm a big guy. Do I really want to keep going? Or do I want to say, nah, I'm good, and I'm going to go back down to the bottom? I went back to the bottom. Now, we did end up in the ER that night. Not me, but that's a whole other sermon illustration, I suppose. In many ways, this metaphor, this illustration, is indicative of a lot of things in our lives. We may start off life or just start off situations going strong, and we get halfway through and we're just plugging right away. But sometimes things happen and we have a choice. Do we keep pushing on, or do we give up? Do we keep going or give in? I think in my own life of faith, especially as God was speaking to me about some things, I think in my own life, God's been calling me to faith, calling me to step out in some areas. And here's what gets in my way: my mind. You see, I think of every reason why I can't. So I start to go through the logistics of God wanting me to do this thing, wanted me to step out in faith. And I thought, okay, if that's going to happen, then this and this and this. And I see the obstacle in my way. I see all of the reasons what's going to have to happen for me to be able to accomplish it. And I can be so immobilized in my faith at times. So immobilized to not obey and to not do what God is calling me to do. When faced with struggles, when faced with obstacles, when faced with giants, maybe not a giant climbing wall, but in your own life, when you've been faced with these giants, some obstacle in your way, what do? In your marriage, when you have been faced with an obstacle, when you've been faced with a situation and you need to decide, do I keep going in this or not? In your work situation, when you've maybe been faced with a situation like, I need to understand, like, do I remain faithful and obedient to the morals and the ethics that I have, or do I just choose the most expedient path? In school, when it comes to a test, in anything in life, we have to make a choice at times. And these obstacles are this morning what I want to call our giants. You see, our giants are either obstacles or opportunities for obedience. There are times when God calls us to be obedient, and when the times get the toughest, is that an obstacle for our faith or an opportunity for obedience? This morning, I will look at the story of David and Goliath. I want to look through it through some fresh eyes and find the ways in which we can continue to persevere, to continue to push on, continue to use our obstacles as an opportunity for obedience. And so if you have your Bibles, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. How do we persevere? How do we remain strong in our faith, when faced with obstacles, when faced with giants? 1 Samuel chapter 17. And we're starting in verse 1. This is a very common story. This is actually a story that we find a lot in our culture. We see this all the time, especially when talking about underdogs. It's David versus Goliath. But let's read this story together. Now the Philistines, who were in many ways, and we see this, the enemy of Israel. All the time we see the Philistines are attacking. Something's happening with the Philistines. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Socoh and Azekah. By the way, the key to reading this, say it confidently. No one will know you're saying it wrong. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley in between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. We're talking at least 7 feet tall, probably, okay? He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor and bronze weighing 5,000 shekels on his legs. He wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. And if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will be our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." And on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was a son of an Ephraimite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's names he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war, so they were out camped on the one hill. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul. David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. let me just kind of get in your mind the geography, because sometimes these places can seem kind of far off and foreign, and we don't think about the area, the geography of the land. In fact, the sanctuary kind of gives us a really good understanding of the landscape. This area that they're talking about would have been fertile. It would have been beautiful, like great place to plant crops. It was also a very strategic area. It allowed Judah to get to the Mediterranean Sea. So it was a natural pathway to go out to the sea. And what we see is these hills and valleys. So if you want to imagine, this is one of the hills, and the one army was camped on the one hill, and then there was this huge valley in between, and the Israelite army was camped on the other hill. And literally what would happen if the one side wanted to attack the other side, they'd have to come all the way down the hill, and everybody's watching them do that. Like, okay, we're going to gear up for battle. They're coming. And they have to cross the huge valley, and then they have to climb up the other side. This is a strategic disadvantage for the attacking army. They're fighting uphill. They're already exhausted because they've come all of this way. They will get wiped out. And so what was happening? Each side was just kind of up in the hills, waiting, and waiting. It was a stalemate. And one day, down comes Goliath. And he's like, I'm the champion. I'll tell you what, we'll make a deal. Send me your best. If I beat him, like, you guys become our slaves. If he beats me, we'll become your slaves. Now imagine this for a moment. He's 7 foot tall. This guy is like literally armored up to what would be that equivalent to a tank. Okay? He's got a shield bearer in front of him. He's armor from head to toe. He's got a javelin, a spear, a sword. Like, this guy is a walking, breathing, moving tank. He's a fortress. He would have been huge. Imagine being on the Israelite side. They're like, that's their champion? Ugh. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to risk my life. And there was even a reward. King Saul had made a reward. He said, listen, whoever goes out there and beats this guy, they can marry my daughter. You can have wealth and fame and power. Like, I'll just give, like, if you can beat this guy, you're going to have it. You're going to be it. You're going to be the bomb. And still, with all of those incentives, everyone was like, nope. Better a slave than dead. Someone else wants to do this, right? Why don't you go out and do this? Everyone was kind of hitting their buddy. No one wanted to do it. And along comes David. We kind of get this idea, and in essence, what was happening was David was delivering groceries to his brothers. I mean, that's the heart of what was happening here. His father would send him, hey, take this food to your brothers. It had been 40 days that Goliath was coming down, so this had been happening for a while. And Goliath begins to taunt Israel and taunt God. David comes along, he's delivering groceries, and he hears this happening. Now, David is a shepherd boy, literally a boy, not probably a teenager maybe. Now, here's the thing about shepherds, and it wasn't just watching sheep, it's more than just kind of like a peaceful pasture scene where they just kind of got their shepherd's crook and sitting out on a rock around the campfire. Like, a shepherd's life was diligent. They had to protect the flock. There's a great deal of bravery. And so one of the things we first know about David is he is brave. His father has put him in charge of the flocks. Because what would have to happen is this: you're protecting of the flocks from all of the wild animals. And to do that, David had a sling. Maybe a modern day equivalent would have been like a slingshot, where you pull it back and you shoot things. Only this would have been a pouch, and you swing it above his head and release. And that stone, that pebble, or whatever it is that's shooting out, would cause some serious damage. In fact, the best slingers in that day and age could hit a target from several hundred yards. Like, these guys were skilled. Like, these were the archers of that day. In fact, so much velocity, so much movement, so much speed would come from that stone that it would have been the equivalent at close range of getting hit for like a handgun bullet. So David is skilled. He's brave, and he hears this going on, and no doubt a little confused, like, hey, why aren't you guys going down to fight this guy? I'll volunteer for this. And so they take him to the king. And no doubt the other guys see his size, see his stature, and are like, okay, we found our fool. We found our sucker. This is the guy that's going to go down. And we can see this happening. And as they take him to Saul, skip down a little bit to verse 34. This is what David responds. This is how he says, but David says to Saul, your servant has been keeping your father's sheep. When a lion or bear and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. David shows not just a lot of bravery, but also a lot of faith in God. Does he say, my skill alone will do it? No. He says, listen, the same God who rescued me, the same God who was with me, will help me overcome this giant. And so what happens is Saul's like, all right, sure, let's do this. And so he begins to load David up with all of his armor. And of course, David's a boy, and Saul is a man, and all of this armor is huge and heavy and weighing him down. And David's like, no, this isn't who I am. Like, I'm not going to be able to fight Goliath this way. And so he takes all of it off. He goes to the stream bed, just picks up some pebbles, some stones to use for his sling. Now again, imagine you're Goliath and they're out there taunting. You're looking over like, send me your greatest. Surely your God's not that great. And hey, he keeps repeating this over and over again. Send me your best. And in the distance, he sees a little boy coming down the hill. Like mentally, what's he going through? What's he thinking? Like, this is your best? This is what you're sending me? And David gets down to the bottom. He meets Saul in the valley. And this is what he says. And if you have your Bible, you can keep reading verse 45. This is how he responds, because Goliath is taunting him. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those who gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. And the Philistine moved closer to attack, and David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. Imagine watching this from the sidelines. And Goliath takes off. And if you're the Philistines, you're like, oh, now we're going to roll. Now we're going to win. And I got to be honest, I think even some of the Israelites were like, well, we're doomed. Because just looking at the size advantage, this isn't a contest. Because the giant is so much bigger. The giant looks huge. It looks like a moving tank. It looks difficult, if not impossible, to overcome. But there was one boy who had faith that it is God who helps us and gives us the strength to overcome. And as Goliath runs toward, David runs towards him. Of course, we know the rest of the story. David kills Goliath. That day, the Philistine army, no doubt, absolutely stunned. And I'm guessing the Israelite army as well, stunned. And Israel goes down the one side, crosses the valley, and begins to give chase to the Philistine army. And that day, Israel wins the victory. Was it because David was skilled? No. Was it because he was brave? No. Is he all those things? Yes. But it wasn't because of those things that the victory was attained. See, David, when facing that giant, had chosen that moment as an opportunity for obedience, an opportunity to put his faith and his trust in God alone. My guess is that some of you right now are going through a similar situation, not literally facing Goliath, but facing a situation in your life where, at least for all appearances, seems difficult to overcome. And you're saying, like, I'm in financial stress, or I'm in marital problems, and I've got all of these things, and I don't see a way out. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way that I'll be able to do this. And you're right on the last part. You can't, but God can. And will you use this giant in your life as an obstacle, as something to run from? Or will you choose it as an opportunity to remain faithful to God and obedience, trusting in God's strength, trusting that God will be with you, trusting that the same God who helped David slay Goliath will help you slay your giant as well? Our giants in life can either be an obstacle or an opportunity for obedience. And it is God who gives us the strength to overcome. This last week, I was actually reading a story of a man who had been arrested 3 times. He had been put in jail for 10 years. His wife and his children were on the outside, and his marriage was in trouble. How easy it would have been for him to give up. To say, listen, I'm here, I'm going to continue in this life of crime, I'm going to continue to whatever. But he used that opportunity for obedience to God. And during his time in prison, trained to become a Bible professor or a pastor. See, he used that as an opportunity to obey God. Here's a man at the lowest of lows in prison he ends up serving 7 years, gets a degree in Bible, becomes a pastor, leads Bible studies, gets out, reconciles with his wife. He could have chosen every excuse to give up, but he chooses obedience. In your own life, in your own struggle, when you face your giant, I encourage you to trust in God's strength to overcome. To understand that in our deepest darkness, it is the light of Christ that illuminates the way. It doesn't mean it'll be easy. It doesn't mean you won't continue to struggle for a long period of time. But what you're saying to God is, I trust in you. I find my strength in you. And even the biggest giant, I'll remain faithful and obedient to you. This morning, I want to ask you some questions. Are you going through a giant situation right now? Like, what is your giant? Is it work, marriage, relationships with someone, school, like a financial issue? What is it? What are you going through that maybe right now you would say, like, this is an obstacle. This is a giant. This is something that I have a choice whether to give up or to obey. And the second is this. How will you put your faith and your hope and your trust in God in the midst of it? Will you find your strength in God alone? In just a few minutes, the worship team is going to come up, and we're going to have a prayer team up here as well. And maybe you, in the midst of your giant, maybe it's a health situation, you want to just say, listen, I need prayer. I need people to pray over me. We want to invite you up for that. As well, maybe your giant is something that you would simply say, God, I want to write this on a piece of paper and just lift it up to you. We have a prayer wall that we've, the last couple of months, we've just been lifting our prayers up to God by writing them down. And maybe that's you this morning. You just want to write that giant and say, God, I need your help. I acknowledge it's the giant. Give me the strength to obey. Give me the perseverance for obedience. Whatever it would be this morning, whatever giant you're facing, will it be an obstacle for your faith or an opportunity for obedience? I want to invite the worship team to come up. I want to invite the prayer team to come up as well. And I invite you to stand and to just acknowledge to God that you put your faith and your hope and your trust in him. And that no matter what happens in your life, you can say, I will not be shaken by any giants.